I read this like a week ago and I kind of only skimmed through it. So
Good, without excuse.
That's
I
fine.
read
Jordan's
it a
already.
week ago. I read the whole thing.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Giffin. And I'm still fairly sick, so this will be a great episode.
But you've discussed the paper already.
See, the thing is, I haven't actually. The week that we read the paper for class was the week that I was at Duke.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
Yes,
Okay.
so I haven't. So yeah,
Rip.
yeah. Well, I mean, we can, maybe that's just like a way to say we'll just move through the paper and
yeah.
and
Sure.
Fine by me.
discuss sort of like, well, because okay, so here's the thing. Oh wait, we should do our. I've grown to like doing that thing that we do where we say
Yeah.
like the so the okay, so the we're continuing in the series. And the paper that we're discussing today is called Valuing Blame by Christopher Franklin. Oh, by the way, I invited a few people on from like the anger readings, and while he said that he, wrote the paper a long time ago and hasn't really revisited it since, he said that because I told him about the like final paper idea I was thinking about, and he was like, "Sounds very interesting. I'd be happy to read it." So that's kind of cool.
That's a W.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Mhm. I'll have to tell you guys about it later, but I think like actually as is the case for the podcast series, I think this paper is actually sort of a natural extension or follow-up of the Srinivasan paper. Because Giffin and
Yes.
I were talking a little bit offline about like it actually seems like we were discussing before, like, well, kind of seems like Srinivasan made a compelling case, but actually there was some like explanatory insufficiency going on in her end. Like she was making a set of compelling arguments, but they didn't seem to actually point to anger specifically. They seemed to point to like an affective response that was like fitting in some way or like appropriate in some way.
Which may include
Um,
multiple, you know.
yeah. So we were saying like, like I remember I raised this point, like it doesn't, it's nothing. She doesn't, to my eye at least, she's not pointing to anger, specifically, but, and this is where I think this is a natural extension. Like Franklin does explicitly say in many places, like angry blame is required to properly sort of appreciate a wrongdoing or an injustice. Um, Also, sorry, feel free to like, I'm probably going to be a little like scratchy or whatever sickness I have involves my throat. So, um, if at any point you have the urge to interrupt me, just please do so.
I object.
But
Yeah, no, we'll
I'm
do.
sorry, but we have to do the thing. Okay, so scale of 1 to 10, how much did you like it? And then scale of 1 to 10, how much did you agree with it? I'll go first. Or no, I'll go last. Adam, you go first.
All right, I think I would give in terms of liking the paper a five,
Hmm.
uh, and then I would say in terms of agreeing with it a higher score, maybe like
Hmm.
a seven or an eight. I thought this paper, for not liking it as much, I didn't like the way it read. I thought it was jargon laden,
Hmm.
and some of the terms like I was only fully aware of like what those terms were by like page 12 of the 17-page paper,
Hmm.
as opposed to like kind of getting an outline early on of like, okay, here's what I mean when I say this. And maybe that's just because I'm not familiar with the field as a whole. You know what I mean? Like these are things that an experienced um writer and reader in the field would be like, yeah, okay, I know exactly what you mean by that. I
Hmm.
did.
No, I actually had a similar experience just to, add on to that. Like I actually went back to like earlier pages of the paper at a few points where I was like, I think I might have missed like that nuance. And I just don't think the nuance was there until like, the later pages,
Hmm.
which,
Um,
I
oh,
would,
sure. Yeah. Sorry, I
yeah.
forgot what your numbers.
Oh, yeah. So I'd say, I don't know. I'm feeling a little bit more generous in terms of liking it. Maybe 6 or 7.
Hmm.
And then agree probably somewhere around there, 7.5, 8, somewhere around there, that
Yeah.
range. With always a little bit of an asterisk, but overall I had a more positive impression and
Hmm.
agreement than the Srinivasan paper.
I am sort of, I can't tell if I'm ambivalent or undecided about this paper. I would say it's a 6 and a 6 for me.
Okay.
It might be a 6.5. I don't know. Here's the thing. He makes a really compelling argument, but I'm not quite sure if it's not more rhetorically compelling than it is philosophically compelling. That's something that like I want to explore with you two. Because also, like we mentioned, I don't know if that will have made the cut or not, but like I haven't discussed this paper in the class. It was discussed, but I haven't discussed it.
Right.
So, I mean, okay, so so in terms of like, okay, so here's the very, very broad strokes of like what I take him to be doing here, and I'll see if this aligns with what you guys read it as. Um, so okay, so I read him. So okay, first of all, um, he's talking about blame, and he uses the word blame here, but in the very beginning of the paper, he explains why he's talking about a very specific account of blame here, which is like an angry blame. So for the purposes of this series, I think we can, if we want to just talk about it in terms of anger, we can. I mean, he's talking about like, you know,
resentment and
indignation.
Like,
yes,
those are the words he uses for like this type of blame.
Yeah.
So
which he calls species of anger. Yes.
I'm so sorry. I left the door open so Sweet Bill came in the room.
Sure.
Sweet Bill.
And he's screaming. It's starting to get him.
Of course. Yeah. So he criticizes Cher's account.
Sure.
Right. That's the one of the, quoted authors.
Sure. Did I tell you, Giffin, that's who I'm taking the seminar with at Rice?
No.
George
you may
Scher.
have actually.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cher.
I mean, I think.
Coin flip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't say his own name. He doesn't say his own last name a lot. So.
Yeah, it's true. Miss it on the first day and you're done.
Yeah. And I did miss the first day.
Excellent.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Well, I was just kind of filling the space while we're waiting for Adam. I was just saying that was like specifically he criticizes Scher's account, calling like their kind of weak form of blame, failing to address the value of more severe blaming responses such as resentment and indignation.
Yeah.
So honestly, I would probably. So I had like a reading of this. I had to keep reminding myself that he was referring to kind of like an angry, inclusive blame. Because if you read it as just kind of like what I would have thought of blame, prior, I thought my impressions were like, higher. It is obvious. I mean, that's probably consistent with like kind of my views thus far. But, the more that he's like trying to like squeeze in the like indignation, resentment, and like anger as, in the forms that we discussed previously, I probably would lower my like and agreement for the paper.
Yeah.
That is good, worth reminding, because I was looking through the end and I was like, well, I have like a lot of like, check marks here, but it's because he kind of stops using those terms in some cases and he just like uses blame. But part of his argument is kind of bringing that in.
Yeah. Because that's the tricky thing is like in the like blame literature, there's actually a lot of very different accounts of what blame is. So that's why, we can basically skip past like section 2 because it's not exactly relevant to like the podcast series that we're talking about, but he just moves beyond like these 2 other accounts of blame, which are sort of like he says that Scher's is like affectively cold, and then there's a Wallace account of blame, which he says is properly affective, but it doesn't have this like essential connection between angry blame and value. And so Franklin like moves beyond that by arguing that he thinks you must like experience this angry blame to sort of like appreciate, or I think he uses the word like defend and protect the intrinsic value of the thing that's wronged. So this is interesting like I'm excited to kind of explore this because we were talking like he like explicitly says many things that we thought Srinivasan may have been implicitly saying last episode. Yeah. Because he says I sorry, I have like a lot of scattered notes.
Yeah, I had a lot of notes for this paper in particular for whatever reason. I don't know if that was just
Yeah,
like the framing, like where
yeah.
the way it was written, which Adam was,
Mm.
critiquing. That might be it, actually.
So, okay, maybe, so I've been rambling a little bit. Like, maybe I should try to do this. Maybe I should try to summarize the main moves of the paper really quick, and then we can just talk about the paper as a whole and like whatever we found interesting. Um,
Sure.
okay, so like here's I took the main moves of the paper to be. So in section 2, he does what I just said. He moves beyond these two accounts of blame. He's saying, okay, I'm talking about angry blame and it's in its necessity of connection, or its like necessary connection to valuing something. So in section 3, the main move is that he like talks about valuing versus judging something to be valuable. And he says genuinely valuing something requires that you devote time to it and that you're emotionally invested in it. In section 4, he talks about this value account of blame, which says that like he makes the argument that we must feel this angry blame in response to free disvaluations of objects of moral value. And because like moral concerns are categorical, they're not optional. This makes it seem like if we don't have that reaction, then we're actually missing something like really important, which is exactly what Giffin said. It sounded like Srinivasan was doing, but didn't come out and say it. Uh, and then in section 5, he makes the final case that angry blame is a required proper response to free actions or like free disvaluations. And then he also has this short section where he argues why sadness can't do the trick. So okay, let's let's move past section 2. Um, so let's talk about section 3, where he's talking about value. First of all, I thought that his differentiation between valuing versus judging valuable, I didn't have any issues with that. Um, on
Sure.
page,
You need like the emotional investment. Like I think he makes
yeah,
this pretty clear there because
yes,
it's all about emotional investment. And
yes.
he thinks that, as you just said, like there are certain emotional investments one should make,
Mm.
um, or at the very least be disposed to make.
Hmm.
What I mean, so
Yes.
So
and one of those is anger. So I hate to kind of jump the gun there on that because I know that's more so like section 4 and 5 as well there, but that's kind of how I viewed that.
Hmm. You were going
actually,
to say something, Giffen?
yeah, I actually just wanted to like bring in a quote from the end of section 1 just to kind of,
Hmm.
begin. So, um, he calls his account the value account of blame. On the basis of
Hmm.
this account of the nature of blame, we will be able to explain why we should not wholly forswear blame. If I fail to be outraged or censure the perpetrators of some crime, I fail to properly value its victims.
Hmm.
Blaming, given the existence of blameworthy agents, is a mode of valuation required by the standards of value, and thus to forswear blame is to fail to value what we ought to value.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was a good, like, 2 sentence summary of his account before we can go into like depth. And we're skipping section 2. That's fine.
Yeah. That's right. That's actually a good quote, Giffen.
Yeah, because I had a small
Yeah.
note on that was like outrage. If you're taking outrage to kind of mean like the anger is
Hmm.
different than censuring, right?
True.
And I thought
Yes.
that was another thing where I was like, I think I would place my disagreement within there. Like,
Hmm.
fail to censure, yeah, I think you're probably failing to value. Failing to be outraged, not necessarily.
Hmm.
It's a little bit of a line in there in that little,
Yes.
or and.
Exactly. No, exactly, Giffen.
Yeah.
So
Anyways,
okay.
that's all I wanted to bring up.
Well, okay. Do you guys? So I'm trying to figure out sort of like the proper frame of this paper also, and he doesn't. So remember, Srinivasan's language was a little bit different, but she talked about instrumental reasons for anger versus intrinsic reasons for anger, and so he's obviously not using that language. But to me, he clearly seems to be talking about like this intrinsic value,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes, definitely. He's not. didn't say that, but he may as well have.
Okay.
At least to my understanding of,
Yes.
the meaning of that in the previous context.
Okay, cool. Because I kind of think, I mean, like, I'm jumping the gun a little bit too, but like my thoughts about this are, he I think that Franklin goes wrong in like one of three ways.
Yeah.
He either one repeats Srinivasan's error, arguing for like an affective response in general, or two, where he doesn't do that and he does evaluate like and he does argue for angry blame specifically. I think a lot of the time he's actually like talking about its instrumental benefits. Like,
I have a good quote to bring up.
yeah, okay. And then the third is sometimes he moves past both of those errors and he does actually talk about like the intrinsic value of angry blaming. But then when he does that, I kind of find his arguments uncompelling. So that's like, I think the style of my lack of satisfaction with this paper, or like this argument, not the paper, I guess. But yeah, okay. But so returning to like the whole thing about valuing versus judging valuable, so he says that like valuing something requires two things. This is on page 214. I'm not quoting, but he says that valuing something requires that you devote time to that thing in a substantive way. Checks out for me. And secondly, that you are emotionally invested in that thing. He says to feel the right emotions when things happen to or regarding that thing, which
or to be disposed to feel the right.
Oh yeah, in the case where there's
which is important when they're kind of competing.
And he granted there are a lot of potential competing, for your time or emotions.
Yes,
so
that's right.
That is a good, important clarification.
That's right, actually. Yeah, the disposition there, that's kind of his version of like doing the whole move that Srinivasan does, where she grants that like, okay, anger can be counterproductive. It's kind of the same move happening here. Like, there are ways for you to not be emotionally invested that don't mean that you haven't valued it. What was his example? It was like if your father has like just died and then you hear that your friend was like fucked over on his final essay or something like that. Like,
something obviously like the one of them is going to outweigh the other exponentially.
Exactly. Yeah. He's like, you haven't failed to value like the wrongdoing to your friend. It's just that like, you have like limited will, like mental power, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that clarification is doing a lot of heavy lifting, I feel.
I'm actually not sure how it is. So if it's relevant later, then bring that up, because I don't know exactly what you mean by that, actually.
I guess what I was thinking of is like in my like gut response to like this, I'm like, okay, like you actually do need to like devote time and have the emotion. But like my first thought is like that's more like a expectation, right? Not like an essential element, right? But then that like clarification to me is like, I feel like that's a problem with this paper. I had on the previous page, I have another comment it's the thing where he's not, clarifying perhaps like the kind of practical versus like the essential.
Yes.
Those boundaries, I feel like they're getting a little bit, warped. So actually, if you don't mind, I actually wanted to make a comment. This was actually a note that I started taking on the beginning of the previous page, or the beginning of the section 3 on the previous page.
Okay.
So in the argument, if I'm reading it correctly, it's kind of broken down into 2 questions. And this is, I think, responding to your critique a little bit. I think question 1 is like that he poses is blame essential to protect objects of moral value? Which makes it seem kind of like instrumental.
Yes.
And the part 2 of that question is,
yes,
thus is blame essential to value, right? And then that's kind of how it's like knit together.
Wait, what page is that on?
I believe it's at the beginning of section 3, unless I've like misread. But I believe I read part of like beginning of section 3, and I went back and made that like kind of beginning of the section big question kind of note.
That's interesting.
That is how kind of like I constructed the questions that he was asking for
Yeah.
for section 3. Now, maybe I misread that. To be frank, that's possible.
Hmm.
But whenever you mentioned like the kind of boundaries between essential and like just commonly, practical, that's kind of consistent with that in my mind.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So like when I hear you say that, I'm thinking, okay, well, here's like what he's saying. He's just saying like you you should actually you are required to sort of like have the anger uptake in a way. Um, as long as like there's not something else that's like devoting your attention or whatever.
Right.
So
The disposition.
yeah, he is. I mean, in that sense, like he is still arguing for the intrinsic necessity of blame to value things, but um, he's almost just like he's almost just like acknowledging that we're like limited creatures or something like
Yeah,
that. Like,
which is fair.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I think also, I mean, he's pretty explicit in the paper that, like, I mean, just to kind of paraphrase what you guys were just saying there, that like essential to valuing is defending and protecting what you
Yes.
value,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
So, and he also says blame is essential to protecting and defending value. So therefore, blame is essential to valuing, right?
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah.
that's how like he's actually constructing it, right? So
Mm.
it's less so like it is an intrinsic argument. It's not merely
Yes, 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 yes,
right. Like that's the argument.
yes. Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Um,
So I guess my question there was about like is it essential to defend and protect them, And he gave that big qualification of like unless something's competing with it, which is going to be very common, I think, in real life. There's a lot
But it's all about being disposed though. So like
right. That's why I was saying does a lot of heavy lifting. It's like it's the disposition that matters, not like the actual like actions. Is what he's saying.
correct. Correct. Which actually I think makes a lot of sense, at least intuitively to me. That,
yeah,
like,
Yeah. No, I'm agreeing
Yeah.
with it, but I was just I do think that little asterisk is doing a lot of lifting here.
like if
'Cause
I
without
value
it, I would
if
be.
I
I think
value something and like for the most part, I am emotionally invested in a certain way to defend and protect it, but you know, there are certain circumstances where I'm not as emotionally invested. It's like, well, I haven't, kind of flouted, my duty to defend and protect in
yeah,
that moment. Like I was disposed in that moment,
yes,
to defend and protect, but it's circumstantial. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the important thing that I took away from this also is so I'm like viewing this argument as almost like a ramping up in a way. And like he hasn't yet defended uh angry blame specifically yet, because all he said about valuing is that you're emotionally invested in the thing. Like you're disposed to have the right sort of emotions. He hasn't yet made the argument, to my eye at least yet, that like angry blame is the right emotion. I think that happens more in 4 and 5, right? Sections 4 and 5.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Um so
And I think like I don't have actually any issue about like, being emotionally invested, or being predisposed to being emotionally invested is essential to protecting and defending values.
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
It all comes down to like, okay, like as you just said, is blame itself
Hmm.
essential to protecting and defending, and then what type of blame, just to kind of iterate that point. So it's like that's where my hang up is personally. It's like
Yes.
not with section 3 actually.
Yes, I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah.
Um so in the middle of 217, he has a quote about like he's summarizing the value account of blame.
Central question. Yeah.
Yeah, so he says first, on this account, blame is a required mode of valuing objects of moral value. Second, blame is a response to free disvaluations of object of moral value. And third, the standards governing how to value such objects specify who is blameworthy and how to respond to such disvaluations. So the latter part of that sentence is like everything, because he's saying that the standards governing how to value such objects, how to appreciate them in Srinivasan's terminology, actually dictates how to respond. And he thinks that that's like angry blame. I also mentioned this briefly, but like just in passing, because we did skip over it. This is another part of the argument that I don't have any issues with. He views like moral concerns as categorical, meaning like they're not something that you can opt in or out of, like being it's not the sort of thing that you can just like hypothetically value. So he says that like these are categorical things of value, so you're actually like doing something wrong if you don't value them. Which again, like I think that part of the argument is solid for me too. Okay. But then so here are these he has three examples at the bottom of 217 and then into 218 where he defends this argument. And I have a lot of questions about these examples. So
I kind of want to hang on 217 a little longer, to be honest.
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
Like I kind of want to make sure that we're on the same page with him.
Mm-hmm.
Because like here's where I start to get questions. Like I just want to read this paragraph. It overlaps with what you just read, but
yeah.
I want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah, good.
So before we actually, because I like this is not even like the major kind of hitch point I had here. So
yeah.
So according to the value account of blame, the standards of value play a dual role with regard to blame. They specify both who is blameworthy and how to respond to the blameworthy agent. It is by freely violating the standards of value that one becomes blameworthy. Okay, I think I'm good so far.
Yeah.
This much is familiar in accounts of blame, sure. Part of what is distinctive in my theory is that the standards of value also specify how we ought to respond to the blameworthy agent. According to the standards of value, we should be disposed to experience blame for the agent who has disvalued an object of moral value, and be disposed to take there to be a pro tanto. Is that how you say it? Pro tanto?
Yeah.
Pro tanto reason to express blame. I want to make sure I understand pro tanto here real fast. I just Googled the phrase and got the most general phrase ever. Is there a specific philosophical meaning to pro tanto? What is
the
that?
way that I have understood that is that there is an initial reason that can be defeated, but it's sort of an intrinsic initial reason, all things being equal. So like, here's it's related but analogous. Like people who argue that, so if you're a retributivist, you think that there's a pro tanto reason in support of people getting what they deserve. So like, imagine two worlds that are perfectly equal. In one world, the people who are wronged sort of like get what they deserve, and in the other world, people don't. There's no other differences. If you have the intuition that like the world in which people get what they deserve is better, that's like a pro tanto reason to be a retributivist.
So intuitive?
Yeah. I think it's more than that, though. It doesn't it depends on what you mean by intuitive. Do you know what I mean? That could have like a pejorative connotation. You know what I mean? If you're talking about like mere intuition. I've always took it to mean like basically, okay, this is it's like a prima facie reason. It's like this is an initial reason for doing something that can be defeated. It's not like
not all things considered, just kind of an initial.
Yeah. Does that align? What did you, when you Googled it, what did you find?
I'll Google it again here.
Yeah.
So I'll show you what I get here. See if that aligns. So
I hope I'm right.
Done or existing to a given extent.
That's odd.
To such an extent, to that extent.
Nice and vague.
Yeah.
I think I actually Googled it and got that same answer, actually.
Yeah, so I honestly felt like in this paper, I'm really not trying to be difficult, but I actually
no, I know.
I feel like pro tanto is actually doing a lot of legwork too.
Hmm.
No, I'm serious. Like there were several points in the paper where that phrase was included, and I'm like,
Hmm.
I hate that this phrase was included because if you look it up here, like it, you know,
So here's on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Do you want me to read this?
okay. Oh yes, please. That's much better.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it is actually. Okay. Um, if a reason favors my doing something, then I have a pro tanto reason to do it. It is a pro tanto, i.e., to the extent of that reason, right for me to do it. So it's only right, like the rightness of the thing extends only as far as that pro tanto reason, but there may be a reason against my doing it, a pro tanto reason not to do it. The fact that a joke is funny may be a reason to tell it, but the fact that it'll embarrass someone may be a reason against doing so. In that case, I have a pro tanto reason to tell the joke and a different pro tanto reason not to tell it. Whether it would be right for me to tell the joke, whether I have an all things considered reason to tell it, will depend on whether either of these reasons is stronger than the other. That actually does help.
I think that helped a lot.
This episode of Plato's Cave is supported by my friends at New Lane University. New Lane University is an online university that offers an Associate of Arts and Bachelor's degree in philosophy at a truly affordable price. The program is self-paced, flexible, and competency-based, allowing you to fit it into your schedule. I've had several listeners reach out to me over the years and ask about more formal philosophy training that doesn't require moving across the country or physically going back to school. If you're someone who is interested in philosophy beyond the self-taught method, New Lane University may be the perfect accessible, low-cost entryway into academic philosophy. You can earn your degree at New Lane wholly online and fully at your own pace. And because New Lane University is accredited by the Distance Education Accrediting Commission, your degree will count in all the ways that professionally matter. New Lane's learning model is different than typical undergraduate teaching. You're able to learn at your own pace, and at the end of each course, you're evaluated through a standardized interview with a course evaluator to see how deeply you've absorbed the material, not measuring your ability to merely regurgitate information like typical exams do. It's an education model built for the student, not an antiquated education system. If you're a longtime listener of Plato's Cave, I recommend researching more about New Lane University. You can do so at newlane.edu. That's newlane.edu. I'll provide links to their philosophy program in the description of this episode. Thank you to New Lane University for supporting this episode of Plato's Cave.
Do you mind if I read that sentence again, just so I think we maybe at least me and Giffin have a better understanding of like the philosophy.
Yeah.
I think I pretended like those two words didn't exist when I was reading through this. Because it still reads well, right?
They were doing a lot of heavy lifting. I mean,
read it again. I'm gonna get. Yeah. I want to get a. You can keep going now.
Yeah. Okay. So part of what is distinctive in my theory is that the standards of value also specify how we ought to respond to the blameworthy agent. According to the standards of value, we should be disposed to experience blame toward the agent who was disvalued an object of moral value, and be disposed to take there to be a pro tanto reason to express blame.
Reason to express blame.
And specifically
to a certain extent.
Yeah, and specifically that reason being so
I think that's where the intrinsicality comes in, right?
Yeah, no, actually, yeah. Because so someone disvalues an object of moral value, and then you're supposed to be disposed to there being a pro tanto reason.
That's like the intrinsic valuation, right? So he's like, I feel like I could be misreading this, but like this seems to be like a really similar move that Srinivasan makes, where she's just like, there's an intrinsic aptness or value to apt anger, but it can be defeated. He's saying like, there's what disposed to take there to be a pro tanto reason to express blame. Consequently, in failing to blame the murderer, we, all things being equal, fail to value the victim. I have a different question about that passage. This seems like a mistake to me. He says, this is the sentence that Adam was reading, but like he says, according to the standards of value, we should be disposed to experience blame towards the agent who has disvalued an object of moral value. Okay, that's one claim. And be disposed to take there to be a pro tanto reason to express blame. Now, is he that language isn't clear, at least to me. So he's saying and be disposed to take. So he's
I think
saying
you go ahead.
okay, so he's saying we have to be disposed to experience blame towards an agent who has done wrong. And that actually is the pro tanto reason to express it, that we have experienced it. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah. So if we're disposed, or if we should be disposed to experience blame, we should that should be a reason to express it. Yeah.
Yeah. But really, I mean, isn't that just besides the point? Like, he's trying to argue that like angry blame is what's required to value objects of value. It actually has nothing to do with like it's true but irrelevant, in other words, right? Like that begins to start to look at like instrumental questions.
I'm wondering if that's what he means.
It's hard to parse that. It's hard to parse
No,
that.
that's genuinely I do not know. I'm reading this over and over again.
I mean, okay, here's
I'm going to continue just so maybe we can see if there's a little more context, like
Sure.
in the second half of the paragraph, because I'm pretty sure I understand what he's saying. Whether I agree with it or not, it's a different question.
Yeah.
But so consequently, in failing to blame the murder, we, all things being equal, fail to value the victim. It is not just that these responses are one way of valuing out of many. Rather, one who fails to care for such objects in these ways fails to value these objects. To fail to blame, then, sometimes constitutes a form of disvaluation. It is in this sense that it can be right to blame. Blaming is a necessary way of properly valuing moral values, but it is also a good to value such objects, and consequently, as blame is essential to valuing them, blame is good. Therefore, it would be wrong and bad to forswear blame. Okay.
He hasn't made the argument that it would be bad to forswear blame. He's making the argument that it would be wrong. Like, do you know what I mean? Bad is like consequentially speaking.
Yeah, I was gonna say
which is the effects,
having those words
which is
side
instrumental.
by side. Yeah, you don't need the one, but why are you including that if you're trying to make it essential?
He actually should just be focusing on the wrong.
Yes.
Which, fine. We'll note that and like move on under the assumption that it's wrong. But like,
he's arguing it constitutes a form of disvaluation. So that would be potentially bad, right? In that sense,
it would be wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like
if you're disvaluing things you value.
Well, no, you wouldn't. But remember, like he made the differentiation between valuing and treating as valuable, where it like the world could look exactly the same. Like we could still treat things the same way, but we could only be like judging them to be valuable or whatever.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right. But he's saying failing to blame constitutes a form of disvaluation.
Sometimes constitutes a form of disvaluation. I think he's saying that in the sense of if you fail to blame, then, or let's say to be more precise, if you fail to experience angry blame, you are disvaluing something in the sense that you're failing to meet a requirement of value. So like,
sure, which is like the defending and protecting aspect of
it.
Yes, which I don't understand why he talks about defending and protecting, but that's later on.
Yeah.
So can we put a pin in that?
Let's put a pin in that. I think I understand what he's saying, but I think he needs to justify it further. So
the more I'm reading this, like the more I feel like there's wiggle room in the wording.
This is, and I don't want to pile on, but this is definitely an issue I had with this paper, was that I felt like I read paragraphs like that, and I'm like, I think I understand what he's saying for the most part. I mean, obviously there were areas where I didn't, but it's like I still don't feel like something's been justified. Like some of these sentences here, and maybe
Yes, yes.
are, but I'm going to continue to read on 217 because I think this is a really important part of the paper. If that's okay with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, you're about to get to the thing that I just said.
Okay. Okay. You cool with me reading that again there?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are three main components to the value account of blame. Okay. First, on this account, blame is a required mode of valuing objects of moral value. Okay. So I think we just had that question why blame is still essential for like the protecting and defending, right? Like that's still an issue we have.
Yes. And I also think for you, but also for the audience, the quote you're reading, if I'm reading it correctly, it's sort of a here's what I'm going to argue quote, and then he does it. It's not a here's what I have argued quote.
That's
right?
Fair. That's
okay.
fair. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Okay, second, blame is a response to free disvaluations of objects of moral value. Okay, I agree with that, just to begin with.
Yes. Yeah.
Third, the standards governing how to value such objects specify who is blameworthy and how to respond to such disvaluations. Okay. Okay. The standards governing how to value. Okay, specify who is blameworthy and how to respond to such disvaluations. I think that's a question we all have right there.
Yes. Yes, yeah. Because he's actually quite clear about the first part of that sentence.
Yeah, but who it is, like who is blameworthy.
Yes, people who freely disvalue objects of value. Yes.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yes, that's clear to me. But I am not at all clear on why angry blame specifically is required to value such objects.
Okay, let's continue here. So I believe the answer lies in understanding the significance of free actions and the specific requirements of the standards of value. Our proneness to the reactive attitudes in response to free disvaluations is rendered good and right.
He should just say right. He should just say right, I think. I'm sorry, that's just me being nitpicky.
Yeah, okay. So is rendered good and right partly by the fact that free actions function as or express value judgments. I agree with the latter part of that there. Certainly free actions function as or express value judgments.
That's just that. I'm sorry, this is for my own sanity as well as like you guys, but I read that he's buying Strawson's argument there. Like he's saying that like our reactive attitudes respond to the meaning behind other people's actions. Right.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. I'm on board with that.
Then he gives, I'm going to skip these two examples. They're pretty clear what they mean. He's just giving two examples of actually a person's actions kind of demonstrating the values that they are expressing.
Yeah.
I mean, through their actions, we can skip those. Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. I actually wanted to read those examples because these are where this is where I have questions. So, okay.
Go for it.
Because, I mean, to my eye, like, again, the structure of this wasn't like completely clear to me, but I took these examples to be kind of like this is where he's defending the argument a little bit, right? He's saying like, okay, he says, in freely throwing my trash on the ground in Yosemite National Park, I am, whether or not I intend to, making a value claim about Yosemite in particular and nature in general. Okay, I completely buy that, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Let's look at the second example then as well. He says the person who destroys a Picasso painting because the owner will not sell it to him expresses value judgments about the painting himself. The painting himself and the owner. He expresses an extreme narcissism, making it clear that the frustration of his desires is not to be tolerated. Embedded in this action is a bloated view of his own value relative to other persons. Okay, again, completely agree. But let me get a sanity check here. When I read those examples, here's what I take from them. They are proving to me that you cannot act in certain ways and value something. You can't value Yosemite National Park and throw your trash on the ground. You can't value a Picasso and destroy it, right?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
but
Or
but
it's like I think they give another example, or
well,
is
I'm
it?
about to get to the third example, but
Yeah. Okay.
it's
Okay. Yeah.
different than the first two because the first two are about the person who's doing the disvaluing.
Yes.
But that's different than the core of what he's arguing, which is that we have to feel a certain way towards the disvaluer, right? That's where like the angry blame comes in.
Yeah.
I
So then
think
on the
he'll get. I think
218.
he'll get to that, right? Like, is like I think
Yeah.
laying the groundwork right here about
Yes.
he's just making a very narrow argument about
Yes. Yes.
reactions kind of having values embedded in them.
But
So,
I'm just making sure right now because like
yeah.
one thing that I want to make sure to do is because I said like I read this paper as like a sloping up, but I want to be really clear for myself. I'm saying like to understand where anger comes in because it hasn't come in yet, right?
Yes. Yes.
No, you're right. Because
Okay.
in 217, what like he explains the three main components, then he says, but why I think the standards of valuing make blame a required response? Why do they require that one go beyond sadness and grief? And then he gives these examples, and then at the end of the paragraph, which is on the next page, he says, free actions therefore have meaning and serve to express a take on what is valuable. I think we're all on board at that point, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
So it's going forward.
Giffin,
Yeah.
Giffin, I'm sorry. What page was the quote that you said like go beyond grief? Where was that?
On 217. This was like right after the three main components and right before Yosemite.
Well, I think that oh, right, why require that sadness and oh, beautiful actually.
To
Okay.
the dark attitude of blame. Why go
yeah.
beyond?
Yeah,
So that's
a
like
really good quote.
setting up. Then he goes on to these examples, but he doesn't really answer that in this paragraph.
Well, he's saying,
He gets us somewhere.
No, you're totally right. He doesn't answer in this paragraph. He's saying it lies in the understanding of the significance of free actions. Okay.
So this whole paragraph of examples is bringing us to the conclusion that free actions have meaning and serve to express a take on what is valuable. I think we're on board still.
Yes,
yeah, right. Then there's another paragraph, and then there's section 5 as a whole.
Okay, but here, so here with the two examples that I read, he has proved so far that the wrongdoer, okay,
Yeah,
I should phrase it differently. Well, excuse me, not even that. I was making a different point where, okay, but so okay, let's ask like, how could this person have valued Yosemite and the Picasso painting? It would be by not having done what he did, right? That's what he's arguing. And I'm just making sure for myself. So this has nothing to do with anger yet. Like
no.
Okay.
No.
Now this is in the middle of 218. This is the third example.
I honestly like if we're going to be doing this, like I want us to continue to move through the paper kind of.
Okay, fair enough.
Because the thing is, like I hate
because the language is
and then I'm just left kind of being like, I guess I don't know what this paper is about.
No, fair.
I want to understand the paper, so let's keep going through.
Okay. Where did I? Okay, so moreover, he fails to value.
You could start on 218.
218,
where Giffin left us off there. I mean, just to make sure we're understanding exactly every paragraph at this point. Because you're right, there is a ramp that we're going up here, and
yes. Okay. Let me just. So this is at the first full paragraph of 218. I'll keep reading. It is because free disvaluations challenge the status of an object as valuable or its degree of value that we are to respond with blame. For the standards of value require that we acknowledge, defend, and protect what is of value. Then he moves to the example, so I might as well just read the example too. Okay.
Totally.
Yeah.
In freely insulting your wife, I am expressing a judgment about her worth. In freely disvaluing her, I am claiming that she is not to be valued. Blame or guilt, which is just self-blame, serves both to acknowledge the wrongness of my actions and to counteract my claim because it too plays an expressive role. In experiencing and expressing blame toward me for insulting your wife, you too are expressing a judgment concerning her value. In particular, you are standing up for your wife and defending her value in the face of a challenge, making it clear that you value her and that my actions are inconsistent with her value as a person. Moreover, by responding in this way, you are protecting your wife's value. Okay. Well, he continues, actually, you are making it clear to her and others that she is of value, and this is the first step in protecting her from further mistreatment. But okay, here's where I get confused. Okay, so like, this is where anger comes in. This is the part of the ramping up where anger comes in.
Has it come in yet there?
Yeah. Well, in the sense that
Not
remember,
yet.
well,
Not yet.
no, it has. Remember, for this paper, blame is just there's a footnote where he says like blame for the rest of this paper is going to refer to like angry blame.
Then what's the next section after this on?
Section 5.
Being a free action of blame, and then and after that, I don't know. I think
I don't know what the difference is between the scopes.
I guess.
Well, let me. There,
I guess
anger is mentioned on 221.
Yeah, because I just want to make this point. Like, I think I'm going to continue to kind of follow the scheme that you laid out there, where it's like he's getting us on board for each point. I'm taking him in his word right now that we're talking about blame, right? Not his specific blame that he's defending.
Oh no, I think that's the wrong way to read it.
Okay,
because
honestly,
after section 2, he says there's a footnote 15 on page 211. This is because remember he moves beyond Schur's account and then beyond Wallace's account, and he says from here on, let blame be understood to mean blame in the reactive attitude sense. Which I took
quite to anger. I honestly don't know.
But he's not okay. So honestly, I'm just not clear then, because like.
But I just recall the end of the paper is where he really kind of says like, why are these other types of emotions insufficient?
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't these serve anger's purpose? And yes,
but isn't that back propagating? I'm sorry to interrupt, but like just. Isn't that back propagating then into saying, well, when he says blame here, he is meaning angry blame? That's how I'm.
No, because the thing is like, so I'm willing to treat blame as a reactive attitude, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to treat this merely as just blame in general. And if he doesn't satisfy angry blame specifically by the end of this paper, we could just say that. We can say, hey, he did not satisfy that specific type of blame, and then we just leave it there. But when he's talking about blame here, I want us to like kind of leave that a little amorphous to an extent and just say, okay, is he right about that point? You know what I mean? Like
I agree. To be honest, yes. I read that the first time as if it was non-angry blame.
Okay.
Even though the word indignation and things did come up in outrage a few times.
Yeah. If he so I'll say this: if he means there, we can just read the quote. Like if he just means, so here's the original quote at the top of the paragraph. He says, "Blame for the standards of value require that we acknowledge, defend, and protect what is of value." Okay, there's two versions of that. Experiencing fitting reactive attitudes is required to acknowledge, defend, and protect what is of value. Check. I agree with that. Anger is what is required to acknowledge, defend, and protect what is of value. Not check for me.
Yeah, and I'm on board for blame. I think
okay.
Using Giffin's language from earlier, just the concept of censure, kind of like serving as just an alternative form of blame there, where when I read I hate to reread the part you just read, but blame serves both to acknowledge the wrongness of my action and to counteract my claim because it too plays an expressive role. Experiencing and expressing blame towards me for insulting your wife, you too are expressing a judgment concerning her value. You're standing up for your wife and defending her value in the face of a challenge. Yeah, I think that's entirely fair. You know what I mean? Like if we're not kind of loading in anger there, I think perfectly fair.
So I have a question here though. Isn't the vast majority, it seems like he's conflating two different things in this example to me. He's conflating the intrinsic value, which is sort of like he uses the word acknowledging, sort of Austin said appreciating or registering, right? Like the wrong. But then he also talks about these instrumental things of like defending and protecting her.
Yeah,
That's
that's
true,
exactly
but
what I brought up at the beginning of 3. Yeah.
there is a later section though where he does talk about, okay, well, what if you didn't even express the blame itself? What if this was something
Mhm.
that really registered within your head? Then it would actually serve to, kind of reinforce those values, like defend,
Mhm.
protect the values within you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That you hold. And I don't think it would be purely instrumental in that sense, where if valuing in a sense is knowing what's valuable and kind of separating what's valuable from what's not valuable and making that clear distinction in your head, that
Mhm.
makes sense to me as like a requirement to value.
Yeah, I agree. But what it's not obvious to me why you like, okay, maybe we can even just say like, instead of blame, let's just say like reactivity in general, or like reactive attitudes. I agree, like would play that, but you'd have to make a case for anger specifically being fitting.
I think you keep jumping that gun. Didn't like the footnote you just said where like he's viewing
Okay,
blame as reactive attitudes?
well, no, I was just the reason why I'm saying that now is I'm just making like a check right now. I'm just saying like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah.
if he's still talking about just reactivity in general, I'm good. If
Yeah.
he has moved to anger, then I'm not. But like,
Yeah.
we'll continue with the
Yeah,
slope.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think
okay.
reactivity, whether expressed or not, makes a lot of sense. For the purpose of defending and protecting values,
Yes, yes.
because
Um,
that kind of alludes back to that emotional investment. Like, are you emotionally invested,
mhm.
or if you are, then there's going to be some reactivity to the free disvaluation of something you value.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Um, okay.
do we agree with that? I think that
I agree
make
with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's it's a pro Tonto reason.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. At least the
So
disposition. Yeah. That's,
yeah.
yeah,
yeah,
totally.
And yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Um,
I agree though that he does kind of like your criticism here, like the final lines you read, he does kind of package a few instrumental things in there, and
which,
like the
yeah,
first step in protecting her from further mistreatment. It's like, okay, well, I
that
let's that like
that's
that.
what I'm worried about, is
Yeah.
because like I'm worried that like, okay, we're like human beings reading this, right? And human beings are pretty bad at like keeping a bunch of different things completely separate in their heads.
Yeah.
So he's talking about like, when he blends in without being like upfront about it, these instrumental goods, I'm wondering if he's like whipping us into this stage where we're like, yeah, like that's how you value blame.
Yeah.
Or I mean, that's
Rhetorically, it's effective talking about like your wife, too. But
because like the version of that example that would be more clean is he's like, he shouldn't. I just think that if you're going to make like this argument that he's making, it's not, I don't want to say dishonest, because obviously that's like not what I'm like trying to say, but like to be scrupulous in the argument, you shouldn't even be bringing up like instrumental goods. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I'm probably phrasing that poorly, but like,
I
you
get
know,
what you mean at the very least. Yeah.
okay.
I completely agree too.
Yeah, he should strive to make an intrinsic argument. So
Yeah, I kind of feel like he's making an intrinsic argument, but then he's being like, oh, and also look at the instrumental reasons or whatever. But
he's muddying the waters.
it's muddying the waters. It's not that he's
Yeah,
wrong, but he's muddying things.
yeah.
Um,
So I'm going to continue if that's all right with this here.
of course.
So disvaluing a person can lead the blameworthy agent, the victim, and third parties to doubt the victim's value. Such disvaluing can lead, perhaps unconsciously, to a sense that the person is not valuable after all, or that valuing her is consistent with treating her in this insulting fashion. Such beliefs can lead to further disvaluing. In experiencing blame, you register the act's inconsistency with your wife's value and resist the subtle growth of contempt for her. You make it clear that you will not stand for or allow such treatment of her. In expressing blame, you make a case for her value to others. To fail to blame me would be to fail to take your wife seriously, implying that what I did was, quote, no big deal. It is for reasons such as these that failing to blame me would be to fail to value your wife. So the last few sentences we're gonna have to take a look at here. So
Yeah. Experiencing blame. Okay, let's parse this here. In experiencing blame, you register the act's inconsistency with your wife's value. Yes. Now, this is my sanity check again. So let's just substitute it for a second. In experiencing anger, you register the act's inconsistency with your wife's value. Check. Would you guys also put a check in the following? In experiencing a combination of grief, contempt, and fear, you register the act's inconsistency with your wife's value.
I might put a check there.
I would also.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be really careful about this. Yeah. Just registering the act's inconsistency with your wife's value. That's all I'm saying. And here's why I would put a check. Because like intuitions alone aren't like very good here. So, okay, here's why I'm saying yes. Okay, so someone insults your wife. Now we have to be really careful here. Let's put aside any thoughts about like the effects, right? Because that's instrumental. Okay, so one person experiences anger and purely anger, right? That seems like that person has obviously registered the act's inconsistency with his wife's value, for sure. Now, the other person who experiences grief, contempt, and fear is also doing that, in my opinion, because that explains the presence of the grief, contempt, and fear. Like the act being inconsistent with her value explains why he would feel those things. So you might imagine that he feels like grief in the sense that like, you know, he realizes that like, you know, his relationship with like the friend is not what it was. Like he thought it was something and it's like less than that. He realizes like he thought the other person was like a better type of person than he was, and he's like aggrieved by the loss. He's contemptuous that like this person would like, you know, you know, say such a rude thing, and he fears how he has to like modify the relationship with this person. Like he fears the loss. In like, okay,
yeah.
Now
again, so one thing I'll say is like I'm totally on board with you there.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely put a check there, just because, you know, putting everything aside, does that fit well within the sentence there? Like those three emotions, you know, do those, you know, provide you the ability to register the act's inconsistency with your wife's value? Yes.
Okay.
So you're totally right there.
Okay.
I just, so with me being, you know, with me saying that you're totally right, I do have a question though.
Yeah,
this is
of course.
probably for my benefit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, could you elucidate the difference between contempt and anger for me? Like because you're using that word and you're throwing that as well. And the thing is, if you removed contempt and only left like grief and fear. Agree. But I need you to distinguish contempt and anger for me here.
It's actually a very good question. So, and I'm trying to do my due diligence, even though this might be bad listening for a second. Readings and sources. There's a paper that I haven't read yet, but that I really want to read. It's called Contempt as a Moral Attitude by Michelle Mason. And I'm going to pull it up right now and see if we can get a quick definition of contempt from the paper. Find contempt. There are 411 references. I'm just going to look at the first couple because those should be, you would imagine, like the ones where she's defining it. Okay. I focus on contempt only to note that it plays a larger role in ethical life. On such a view, contempt in its properly focused form is a feature of the every now ethical landscape. My defense. God damn it. How about this? Let's look at SEP contempt because I actually get what you're saying, Adam, because I'm taking it that like there's this I'm taking it that here's what's part of your question. And I think Franklin mentions this. I think Srinivasan mentioned it. I think we've like talked about it when we talked about Strawson, et cetera, right? It seems like some attitudes are responding to features of agents specifically, while some emotions can be responding to non-agential like happenings.
Totally.
Grief and fear are completely compatible with non-agential.
And even disgust, like you've said,
even disgust, yeah.
And I'm okay with disgust. I guess from like a layman perspective who isn't mired in philosophy, when I hear contempt, I could be entirely persuaded that it could be a non-agential, emotion felt, but I'm like, do I ever feel contempt? Do I feel contempt?
I was actually thinking that it was agential.
I'm sorry. That's my point. Like,
okay.
He's inclined towards that, but
yes,
couldn't be convinced.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so wouldn't that kind of, or agential, you're meaning saying like, kind of toward an agent. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So to me, that almost like if it's a reactive attitude in that sense, I don't see it as too different than anger.
See, okay. Maybe you're right. Actually, maybe so. You're arguing that contempt is just a version of anger.
But also I can imagine like
it feels different though. I'll be honest.
Yeah, because you could have like contempt for our healthcare system. You know what I mean?
It's like an assessment more so than like something.
So okay, if you just
I get that point. It's just more like contempt for the healthcare system. Like it's obviously sort of just a like. When I hate how our current healthcare system is run, like, am I imagining from my perspective that there are people who are blameworthy for it? Or am I really just, do I feel contempt for the abstract system? I think the latter. So I think I'm going back on everything I said and that I'm okay with contempt being, I just had to kind of think that through just because the prima facie understanding of contempt, I'm like, is that just anger? No, not necessarily. But maybe when we're talking about the guy who insulted, someone's wife here, I don't think contempt would be too different from anger.
Yeah. Okay. So this might be like a good time to clarify what I think I've been trying to drive at like the last two episodes, which is I'm not trying to make the argument that anger doesn't appreciate in Srinivasan's terms or like acknowledge. I'm trying to make the argument that they haven't made the argument that it's the only way to, or it's like a required way to do so.
Yes.
Like it's on equal footing with all of these other emotions.
So you're questioning whether it's essential. So
yes.
So the thing is like, so if you're including contempt in the 3, when you replace blame with like, grief, contempt, and fear, I almost feel like contempt plays the role of anger there. But I agree with you that if you removed contempt from that situation and just left grief
and fear,
I feel like that would still give you the ability to register the acts.
Yeah. So you're just saying make it even cleaner. Contempt might look like you're smuggling in anger. Just make it even grief.
Yeah, and that wasn't me being picky. That was me just honestly.
No. That's actually really good.
Like
that's excellent.
We talk about contempt, like
no, it's good.
Yeah. His phrasing is totally like, I think we all agree. Like if you experience blame, then you do register it. But it does seem like he's kind of implying this, this
Yeah.
false, logical leap of, a lack of blame is the lack of registering. That's where we're at right now, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Well,
just to
I think a lack of blame is a lack of registering, but it just depends what you're packaging into blame. You know what I mean?
a
Like
lack of reactivity in general would be a
Right.
lack.
Right.
Yes.
yes, I
Yes.
totally agree. Totally agree. So it's like
Yes.
he kind of laid out on the first page, like we talked about, he's talking about a very specific type of blame. We're all on board with that. We understand that. But we need him to justify that specific type of blame, which I think he tries to do at the end of the paper, which is why I'm like going with him for now. And so maybe I'll be wrong in the end, but that's kind of how I read the paper. But
No, that's fair. That's fair. To close the loop real quick on contempt, the lay definition of it is just the feeling that a person or thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving of scorn.
that's pretty cool, though, because
Yeah, I know.
scorn is a type of anger.
I
So-
know, which I think I've always thought of contempt as more of like someone is beneath consideration. They're like they
An
shouldn't even
assessment. Yeah.
they shouldn't even be taken into account. Like that's kind of what I've always thought of like contempt as.
There's like a there's a wonderful like Harry Potter quote actually that just like it reminded me like where it's like in like the second book where I'll keep it super short here, but there's a relationship between like kind of the antagonist in the book, Draco Malfoy, and Ronald Weasley, who comes from like a very poor family, and and Ronald Weasley's father is kind of like just kind of like a nobody prole at like the Ministry of Magic. So he's in like some sort of legal trouble, and it's kind of published in the papers that he is, but they spell his name wrong. He comes gloating into the hallway, and he's just like they don't even know his name. It's as if he's a non-entity.
Yeah, that would be to demonstrate contempt. It's like
I've always loved that. Just like it's as if he's a non-entity. So,
that's very cool.
Sorry for that aside.
No, that's funny.
For example.
So I think we're all on board. Let me read that final paragraph just to kind of truly close the loop on that section, and we can move into 5, which is his final argument. We now have the beginnings of a defense of the values account's main contention, namely that blame is a mode of valuation required by the standards of value. The connection between blame and value obtains because 1, the significance and status of free action, and 2, blames being essential to how we defend and protect moral values. Okay, we will explore these claims in the remainder of the paper. Okay, section 5, we're expecting him at this point, or at least I am, to kind of begin to explain how anger specifically is essential to blame.
Yeah. And
it's an essential reactive attitude one needs to feel.
Yeah. So the other version of saying what he's saying is that if one does not feel anger, then one has not properly sort of valued the thing or appreciated it.
Totally.
Okay,
totally.
Good.
Exactly. Okay.
So I think we're actually okay to skip to the bottom of 219 in the sense that everything that he says previously is fairly straightforward. He's just talking about free actions there, where he says free actions carry the significance they do because of their connection to reasons. Free actions are, among other things, actions performed for reasons. So he's just talking about when you do something freely, it's an action that is in like alignment with your desires. You're not under compulsion. It's actually a reflection of like what reasons you have for doing something.
I've only checked marks there.
Yeah, that's all straightforward to me. Okay. So then at the bottom of 219, he says blame is a fitting response to free disvaluations, partly because of the meaning expressed in those actions. However, according to the value account of blame is not only a fitting response, but a required one. So that's the bottom of 219. And then into 220, but still on 219, he says, first, the standards of value require that we defend and protect moral values. Second, only blame plays these expressive and functional roles. Therefore, blame is a required mode of valuation. Okay, so the first line of that sentence, or that set of sentences, is good. First, the standards of value require that we defend and protect moral values. Okay, fine. But again, defend and protect are actions, right?
Yes, and then he clarifies later about unexpressed versions of things.
Okay,
but it sounds like it.
Okay, so but the second line, he's still just asserting that only blame plays these expressive and functional roles. Because I mean, I'm not saying that pejoratively. He hasn't gotten to it yet, but he's going to. But then here's where I get confused again. Okay, second, only blame plays these expressive and functional roles. Is that not instrumental?
Functional, pretty close.
No, but even expressive, it's like literally like.
If only blame plays those roles to defend and protect moral values, though, and more defending and protecting is essential to valuing, then I see the intrinsic aspect to it. You know what I mean? Like I still see like only this can lead to this, and this is necessary to valuing. So therefore, it's
so it's a linked argument.
I see it still as a linked argument.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. He backs this up a little bit later, still at the top of 220. He says, to fail to stand up for the moral value can involve you in a kind of complicity. Your failure to act can be a form of acquiescence to the judgment expressed in the free disvaluation. Again, I'm fine with that. But he's not talking about anger yet.
He does get the anger by the next page at the very least.
Okay. He talks about the middle paragraph in 220. He's just talking about protection of values in the same way. I didn't think there was anything super new there.
I've been putting check marks down this whole series of paragraphs.
I have been reading the same thing here, so I feel like reiterating much of his points.
Okay, here's 221. Okay,
do we want to read about the objection that justification offered here only applies to expressed blame?
At the bottom,
Let me read the bottom paragraph here. So. One might object that the justification offered here only applies to expressed blame, offering no reason to think that it is good to experience unexpressed blame. But this objection has little to recommend it. Okay, all right. First, even unexpressed blame can serve to defend and protect moral values. Blame helps to undergird our own beliefs about moral values in the face of challenges. Just as expressed blame makes a case to others for the value of the object, unexpressed blame makes a case to ourselves for the value of the object. We often wonder whether doubt that, or reject the claim that an object is of value. Blame can weigh in and direct us in this line of inquiry. These comments are especially applicable when blame is self-directed. Guilt defends the status of the object too and protects against further mistreatment of the object by ourselves. Okay.
Almost there.
Yeah. According to many accounts of the natures of emotions, blame or anger is a particular mode of construing a situation that renders certain facts salient, such as that a wrong has been committed, that someone has been freely disvalued, and that this needs to be recompensed. Second, if one grants that the actions characteristically motivated by the emotions that constitute blame, resentment, indignation, and guilt are good and right, it is hard to envision how one might still find the emotions themselves objectionable. I cannot imagine what would be the basis for endorsing the characteristic activities of blame while rejecting their characteristic motivations. Okay.
Big if.
Yeah. So now he is linking everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Okay.
trying to.
Well, yeah, he's trying to here. So
I cannot imagine what would be the basis for endorsing the characteristic activities of blame while rejecting their characteristic motivations.
Yeah.
Endorsing their characteristic.
True.
Wait, no. I mean, I can imagine it. It doesn't mean I don't have to agree with it.
No,
Wait.
it says if one grants that actions characteristically motivated by the emotions that constitute blame are good and right. So he qualifies that first.
It is hard to envision how.
I don't think he gives us a reason that we should grant that, but he does at least say that.
I'm sorry. I'm having trouble parsing it. Okay. If one grants that actions characteristically motivated by the emotions that constitute blame are good and right, it is hard to envision how one might still find the emotions themselves objectionable. Oh, okay. So in the sense that like, yeah. Oh, okay. I see it. I see it. So if you're not going to say that like the typical ways that those things are expressed is wrong, then like on what basis are you going to say that those are wrong?
Yeah. He needs to bring us to that second,
but I mean, but honestly, like didn't Nussbaum kind of do this? She's saying like Seneca also like, but they're ugly. Like anger is like an ugly thing to feel. Even if like this was Seneca and Nussbaum, remember, like both of them granted that like sometimes anger can be like expressing anger can be instrumentally valuable, but like it's kind of like ugly to experience.
Is instrumentally valuable different than good and right, which is the framing here?
I don't know.
Fair. Yeah. I don't know either.
Well, okay, maybe.
I'm actually still on Jordan's side on that one right there. I think you could, like, if I didn't know what emotions were behind behavior, and then but the behavior I deemed itself good and right,
Yeah,
and told me that, oh well, it was actually the kind of primal emotion behind it was anger, I could still find the anger itself objectionable.
yeah. Here's a good example. This is an example from Nussbaum. Think about like MLK's like angry speeches for like racial justice. You could imagine his behavior being exactly the same, but with two very different internal looks. Like
Sure.
you could imagine like hate like coursing through his veins as he was making those speeches, or you could imagine like empathy for his fellow African Americans and like hope for the future and like the behavior, the intonation of his voice being like exactly the same.
Yeah,
Right.
I agree entirely with you. So I think it's not actually hard to envision how one might still find the emotions themselves objectionable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or at least that's how I'm reading him there.
No, I think that's right. Like I can imagine what the basis would be, and it would be sort of like the ugliness to experience those emotions, like the the soul corrupting, like
Oh, it's what's interesting is like he gets into the blame curmudgeons, accepting
yeah.
premise, but then denying his second premise, the one we're disagreeing with right now. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
do we want to read his response here?
Yeah, do it. Because
Okay.
I had questions, yeah.
Yeah, because I agree with your point. So the blame curmudgeons will likely grant my first premise that valuing entails that we must protect and defend moral values. Sure. And yet deny my second premise that the only way we can do this is by blaming. Oh. Well, they might not necessarily deny that. Or I guess the blame curmudgeons themselves, who are just like flatly against any type of blame, might do that.
See, that's why I don't know. I hate to like reanimate this point, but like that sentence in particular, I think is what was making me think that the entire time he's been talking about blame after section 2, he's been talking about blame as anger.
if true, then we've identified earlier where exactly we disagree with him, because
Yeah.
Kind of substituted in different types of reactivity that we would say, hey,
Mhm.
that can actually replace anger. And
That's my point. Is yeah.
So I think it was good to read it both ways just to make sure exactly that we were on
Mhm.
board with whatever he was saying. But
Mhm.
let's still see if he tries to in some way, because I know later at the very end of the paper he does address things like grief.
It's right. It's the next paragraph,
Oh,
actually.
the next paragraph? Okay,
Yeah.
why can't sadness play the same expressive role?
Exactly. Yeah.
Let me finish the first paragraph
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
and then we'll get right into it.
Mhm.
So, see, they will argue that we can defend and protect objects that give rise to moral values through alternative means. But can we really value, for example, persons and yet not be disposed whatsoever to blame those who wantonly disvalue them, or fail to see any reason whatsoever to rebuke those blameworthy agents, or always fail to express our indignation to the person disvalued so as to affirm her status as valuable?
Hmm.
I find such ideas hard to square with my experience of value.
Pause.
Yes.
I was thinking here, well, like, that could be true, but not show that anger is the only way to do that. If it's just the case that, like, that's how you and your culture does it, but are you really going to say that, like, just imagine a different culture where, like, I mean, obviously you can't do this like fully because we are in our culture, but like, just imagine a different culture where, like, okay, someone like insults your wife and you just like express this like deep grief, like it sat like, you've caused me like great sadness. I thought that we had like a certain type of relationship. I thought that you were a certain type of person. And when you did that, you showed to me that you weren't that kind of person, that we didn't have this kind of relationship. And I feel like deep loss for that, because I've lost someone who I thought was like that type of person and that type of friend.
Sure.
Really? So like Franklin can't imagine that has registered like the free disvaluation. It's defended his wife. That see, this is where I was saying, like, remember, I kind of thought that he went wrong in like three different ways. One, he had the repeat Srinivasan's mistake, arguing too broadly. Two, he smuggles in instrumental values. Or three, and this was three, where he actually just makes the boldest version of the claim he has to. He's just unconvincing because, like, that.
I underlined this section and I put, okay, endorsing norms.
Yeah.
He basically just like, I endorse these norms, therefore,
Because it's like,
same note.
Because honestly, like, is he right about me? Yes. I'm an angry person. Like, he's right about me, but is he right about anger in general? I just don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, he's making an intrinsic argument here, so he can't
Yeah.
be like,
Yeah.
argument about norms. You know what I mean? Like, culturally, this is what we do. So it's like, yeah.
And he can't be, he does not have access to any, he can't begin to speak about the effects. So, like, so first of all, it depends on how he means protect and defend, because there's an obvious way in which you could be talking about that instrumentally. Like, how do you secure protection for this thing? Maybe it's to get really angry and like puff up your chest or whatever and like scare the guy off. I guess there's an intrinsic version of like, how do you protect this thing like internally by registering like the right level of value for it?
Reinforcing your value assessments.
Yeah,
and the latter is more interesting. Like that gets
yes
a more intrinsic aspect of it.
I agree. But that's like, when I just think, well, you're just endorsing like the values that our culture has like happened to instill. There's like nothing special about it.
So let's see how he responds to sadness, because you did bring up grief, grief and fear, and
yes,
there's a pretty good scenario where it's like, yeah, I can't disagree with you at all that you register the free disvaluation of something you value. Like if you felt just deep grief, because
so, I'm thinking because how else would you explain the presence of the grief? Like,
yeah.
Because you could even okay, maybe here's another even further like way to put the argument. The level of grief you feel could be directly proportional to how free the disvaluation was. Like you could imagine like okay, here's a state of affairs. Your wife has like a wine stain all down her like shirt or whatever, right? Here's two ways that it came there. There was an earthquake that like shuffled a glass and it spilled the wine. That's like a non-agential state of affairs. Here's another way it like the wine stain occurred. Your dinner guest insulted her, like just threw the wine at her, right? Okay.
Yeah.
In the latter case, I'm imagining this culture where just anger doesn't exist. You could imagine that the person would feel even more deeply aggrieved in the second case rather than the first, and it could be precisely because it was a free disvaluation, right? Like, so you can preserve the importance of the free disvaluation by tracking like the magnitude of the grief.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I totally agree with you. And why don't we see how he responds to that? Because I think we're all on the same page there.
Okay. I just want to put that, like, honestly, just for myself, even.
Yeah, no, of course. It's a good example. I mean, it could be the degree to which you feel grief. Could distinguish between agential and non-agential, as you just said. But okay, but why can't sadness play the same expressive role?
Yeah.
Two features of sadness: what it responds to and what it expresses. Prevent it from playing So two features of sadness: what it responds to and what it expresses. Prevent it from playing the same role as blame. Sadness is fundamentally a response to the loss of or harm to an object we value, whereas blame is a response to the objects being freely disvalued. We respond with sadness when an object we care about is lost or harmed, regardless of the cause of the harm. The harm may have been brought about by a non-rational agent, such as a storm, by a rational agent, albeit through an accident, I tripped and knocked over your wine rack, or by a rational agent who freely disvalued the object. I purposefully knocked over your wine rack because of jealousy. Sadness only tracks the fact that a loss or harm occurred. It is not a response to free disvaluation qua free disvaluation, and so cannot protect and defend moral values in the ways identified above. Okay.
Isn't that like a merely sort of parochial way of thinking about things? Like, sadness only tracks the fact that loss or harm occurred. It is not a response to free disvaluation qua free disvaluation.
You just gave the example of like, if it is free evaluation, the magnitude can change, and then it's responding to that. Right? Yeah,
I just don't understand why that's like a necessity claim.
So I guess let me pose an idea myself on this one here. Let's go back to what's that one peak called that you hiked recently?
Angel's
Peak. Oh,
what was it?
Angel's Landing. The guy who didn't hike it answered boldly.
Well, the landing. Well, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So Angel's Landing. So okay. So I think I'm imagining like, I don't know, like a relative going there and falling versus being pushed. Okay, and then in both cases dying. So I can definitely imagine like a society, as you posed earlier, where the grief would be felt even more strongly because of a free disvaluation of my relative. But I'm wondering, like, I don't know, I guess like there is part of my intuition there that maybe something is missing, as opposed to someone just falling versus being in that case.
See,
I'm wrong on that, but I'm just kind of thinking about it. So.
Here's the thing is like, I actually do agree with you, but I'm questioning the sort of like philosophical robustness of my own response there. Like, because you're right. Like, I do agree with you. But I'm thinking about like this person from another society who's like seeing that. And you could imagine like I just almost feel like it just comes down to like how you put it. Like, imagine this person who is just like they're like overwhelmed with grief at the loss of their relative also. And then there's just this like horrific second wave of grief as well, where they realize that like someone was a horrible enough person that they could have pushed them off. And it brings them like deep, deep sorrow to realize that there are like people like that in the world, that their relative was unlucky enough to have encountered this person. Do you know what I mean? Like, etc. Um,
I just wonder, like, I'm just kind of thinking out loud right now, but I'm wondering
yeah,
if there's maybe a little bit of like, well, let me just kind of just spill
it,
my thoughts here, because
yeah,
what you're doing is you're collapsing two distinct kind of reactivities into almost like a single reactivity of just grief, where you're saying,
yeah,
well, kind of the distinguishing factor between, you know, agential versus like non-agential could just be like the degree to which you feel grief,
mm-hmm,
as opposed to like there being two distinct reactivities, one that kind of maps onto non-agential. Is it
mm-hmm.
agential? What is it?
Agential, yeah,
Agential. That word
yeah.
comes out so weirdly,
It is. It's a
but
weird word.
yeah, but like one word, but like one kind of reactivity that maps onto agential versus another type of reactivity that maps onto non-agential. But it almost seems like you're saying there can be a single, not a single reactivity. That's not what I mean, but
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah, like
one
grief. Why can't grief
reactivity.
do it all? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just degree.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's also like I feel like you can be aggrieved not only by the loss, but also by the free disvaluation. You know what I mean? I'm just like,
Yeah.
because Franklin's right that like we tend to be aggrieved by the loss and angered by the free disvaluation, but I can't understand a like robust way besides me just pounding the table and being like, no, like weird, as in like the Joe Henrich, like white, educated, industrialized, rich democracies. People, we do it right. Like,
Yeah.
you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
I endorse
Like,
the norm, basically.
yeah. It's just like it because remember like and if I'm trying to like make this argument in like writing for the term paper, like I feel like the thing that I have to be like very clear about is that like, okay, um, I am not at all saying like that grief also wins instrumentally. Maybe it doesn't, but we said that we're not talking about that for right now. Do you know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
and I'm also not making the case that someone who has someone who would experience it with anger is doing something wrong either, but there's nothing special about anger that's like required for
No,
this.
I think your argument about degree makes sense, because that would
Yeah.
provide even like the recognition aspect, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
you could recognize free disvaluation through the degree of the grief that you experience,
Yes.
Yeah.
and grief itself could, serve to reinforce within
Yeah.
one's own mind,
I,
and
yeah.
defend and protect those values.
Yeah.
So
And you can imagine that they censure the person, like, after these,
Yeah.
emotions pass too. Like, so that like instrumentally it's still there. Like,
sure,
Yes. Yes. Think about
right.
think of some of the most like powerful testimony from like a court case or something like that too. Like I could well imagine that some of the most powerful testimony could focus solely on grief. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
you have robbed us of like this wonderful person. You're like, you know what I mean? So it's not even
Yeah.
clear to me that like, because he was talking about defending and protecting, and we said, okay, well, on one version of that, you're obviously outside the scope. But even if we're talking like internal to the person and so intrinsic, like it's not obvious to me that like, I don't know, like why can't grief actually like protect and defend the value just as much like internal to the person? Like
Yeah.
it
It seems to be
reminds me of
reinforcing your own values at the very least.
yeah, it reminds me of like the Nussbaum point that we brought up last time about like your friend is sexually assaulted and you're like Nussbaum made the point that like anger actually in one way almost seems like inappropriate because it's like taking away from like your focus on the friend. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
And all three of us are fine with blame as long as like blame is being defined as like reactivity. You know,
yeah. In general,
like,
yeah.
like in general, as opposed to
Mhm.
like a very specific type of reactivity, like anger. So
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you care if I continue to read here just so we can kind of wrap this up a bit? Because
Sure.
I think we're all on the same page for the most part here.
hmm hmm I think the
Okay,
rest of what you're about to read all gets into instrumentality.
You
I'm just
mentioned,
prefacing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just
yeah. Go ahead.
prefacing.
Maybe
Yeah,
we'll
but
find
read
that
it.
less interesting anyway. So sadness also, and most important, does not have the dimension of condemnation required for defending and protecting moral values. This is because sadness does not indicate that anyone has violated the standards of value. It indicates only that an object of value has been harmed, but not all harms are disvaluations. Yeah, we kind of agree on that, but it
Mm-hmm.
like you already said, degree could actually differentiate that.
Mm-hmm.
So
And also, he seems to be slipping into like instrumentality talk too. Like,
he is.
yeah.
One can feel saddened as a result of an action that one judges to be right. Okay, I don't know if this example is. I'll read it anyway. We can imagine a father grief-stricken over a child's incarceration, even though he recognizes this to be the right thing to do. The sadness of the father is responding to the loss of the child, not to a disvaluation of the child, since as the father himself recognizes there is no disvaluation in this case. It is clear that the grief is a response to the loss of the child, not the value judgment expressed in the imprisonment.
Wait, pause. He says the sadness of the father is responding to the loss of the child, not to a disvaluation of the child. Since there is no disvaluation in the case. Well, yeah, but isn't that besides the point? Like, sadness can respond to the loss, but isn't the actual like relevant example? Shouldn't there be a disvaluation? Like, he's just reaffirming that like sadness also responds to loss in general. Do you know what I mean? Like this example is almost like completely orthogonal to like what he's been talking about, right?
And furthermore, I feel like his case actually kind of works against him with the one that you posed earlier, where it's like, now that we read that case, it actually, the intuition that you put forward actually strikes me more powerfully, where I'm like, actually, I think a father would grieve more if his son was shot, killed, versus actually having, been rightfully imprisoned.
Yes.
And like
yes.
that's like you know what I mean? Like that's not it's not exactly falsifiable or provable, but that's kind of my position there is that if the child had done wrong and was rightfully imprisoned, feel less grief than a evaluation on the part of someone else. Like grief can kind of track pre-disvaluation as you put forward.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting what I was saying also. Yeah.
Do you have that intuition, Giffin, on that?
No, I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
He seems to.
I
think that I don't know that anything new happens in the rest of the paper, honestly.
Yeah, he quotes Sir Walter Scott.
Hey, do we want to just like summarize like right before the conclusion or the conclusion, like some summary?
I do have a summary. This is on 223. He says, these reflections drive us towards two conclusions.
Yep.
First, the standards of value do not entail that we must always respond to free disvaluation with unexpressed and expressed blame. Rather, they require that we are disposed to so respond. We've pushed back against that if we take blame to be anger, angry blame. We've agreed with that. Actually, if you take blame to just mean reactivity in general.
Yes.
Which importantly can include anger, just doesn't have to be anger. Second, the standards do entail that not any reason for omitting blame will do. If I do not express blame at the person who freely insulted your wife simply because I do not feel like getting involved, then all other things being equal, I have failed to value your wife. Once again, I think we agree with that. If blame here is meant to be reactivity in general, disagree if it's anger. Um, yeah, I. Hmm. I'm actually thinking now about like when we gave our 1 to 10s on how much we agreed with the paper.
Mhm.
There's kind of a way in which that answer could either be 9 or like 2. Because,
Yeah, no,
because yeah,
Yes.
I was
yeah,
answering
yes,
non-angry, and I was like, up to an 8.
yeah,
If
because
it was angry,
yeah,
it would be lower. Yeah,
if he's
much
talking,
lower.
if this whole paper instead of blame, we just swipe or like just change that out for reactivity, I'm like a 9 in terms
Yeah.
of agreement. If we did
Yeah.
do blame as swap it out for angry blame or anger, I'm like a 2.
Yeah, no, this was like a paper that was filled with check marks for me. Just going through, I'm like,
Mm,
this maps on. Like, there's just like a little bit of inquiry we need to make within a sub note about, potential anger that like could
yeah,
destroy the entire thing.
yeah,
And he does
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like haphazardly include the words anger, indignation, outrage, frequently without it, being obvious whether or not that's actually, constitutes his definition of blame.
And like
Yeah.
for me, like I like the when I read through it, I didn't I knew what he was arguing for, but I took blame to be a little less defined throughout the paper until he got to the point where he was like, okay, well, why can't sadness suffice
Mm,
in these kind of potential reactive
hmm
responses or attitudes?
mm.
So I was sort of on board with things being said, but I agree. Like overall, I don't think he met his goal. Um,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
good paper to talk about. That was
Oh,
interesting.
it's a very rich paper. Yeah. Yeah. I think the only difference between the way we read it is like I allowed the ending to propagate backwards into like all instances of blame. But I actually think that the way we kind of ended up discussing it is the better way to do so, where we understand like here's 2 possible ways, and then we follow where we get off the train
Yeah.
Yes,
for like
yes,
both. Yeah, I think
Yeah, the
that's
critical
actually a
juncture
better.
there
Yeah.
was
yeah,
obviously
yeah,
anger.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think I'll bring up the title. Actually, I'll do it now. Why not tease it before actually ending the recording? The next paper, well, I guess if you guys want to read it. Oh, by the way, tentatively, Glenn Pettigrove, remember I referenced last time that paper, Meekness and Moral Anger?
I do.
Pettigrove has agreed to talk with me potentially next week, maybe the week
Oh,
after that about the
Hell
paper.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
very
hell yeah.
excellent.
Okay. Well, I hope anyone who listened enjoyed this episode and is enjoying the series. And if so, be sure to tune in next time. If you enjoyed this episode of Plato's Cave, please support the show by researching New Lane University. You can find out more at newlane.edu. Thank you to New Lane University for supporting this episode of Plato's Cave.